excited about this. I am incredibly passionate about stewardship when it comes to IT. I've got a very strong, I guess, affinity for biblical finance and how that approaches into technology and everything along those lines. So I'm looking forward to jumping in today. But my name is Zach Norris. I run a company called Lamb Telecom. And so we can get into some of that at some point outside of the room here. But I'm looking forward to talking through some of these things, strategies on how to approach stewardship in IT, some questions that you might be able to ask when you're looking at purchasing IT, some things to look out for, as well as just everything in between. And so you guys came to a session with some fun giveaways, so this should be exciting. Now we're talking about stewardship that does involve finance. So I want to kind of jump in here to talk a little bit about what stewardship is. And the other thing too that I was going to mention, you're going to find some fun lamb photos. I said I run a company called Lamb Telecom. I love AI and I love lambs, and we're going to see all sorts of lambs today. So have fun with what you see. But anyway, for a short little giveaway here, a $2 bill, I got a few of these today. Someone tell me what you believe stewardship to be.
Being wise with the money that's given to you.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah. I got more, so if anybody else wants to throw one out there. I can't throw these like candy. Anybody else? All right. Yes?
Taking care of what you've been given.
Absolutely. Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah. Awesome. And they are real, I promise you. It's not funny one. So really what the dictionary, or I guess the Google dictionary describes stewardship as, is the job of supervising or taking care of something, such as an organization or property. And when we think about stewardship from an IT perspective, yes, that does have to do with financial stewardship, but it also means that all of the IT, all of the stuff that we've been given, all of the tools and whatnot that we've been given, those are all to be managed by us and not necessarily consumed by us. I love technology. I went straight to Costco and bought my AirPods 3 Max or whatever, and purchased, or I guess not 3 Max, but 3 Pros, and purchased those with my Apple Care warranty, and that was like a week after they came out. I love to be a technology consumer, but when we're doing it for church, of course, we have to recognize that it is for the Lord, and it's already His. And something that was really impactful to me that I read a few months ago in a book that I was given was it was a book about financial stewardship, and that was more on the money side. But one thing that was impactful at the beginning was that there was actually a physical deed in that book that you were to sign over all of your possessions to the Lord. Everything that you had, you were to give to Him. And it was a physical act, a physical signature of giving that to Him. So when we think about that from an IT perspective, all of the budget that we've been given, all of the tools that we've been given, all of the fun products that we get to work with, and even the challenges that we get. How do we steward the challenges we get? All of that plays a part in stewardship. So today, as we're walking through that, a couple of things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about assessing technology spend through a ministry lens. That is different than the corporate world, and so I'm curious kind of who might be here from the corporate world originally. Bless you. And strategies to prioritize IT investments based on a mission. Are we looking at stuff through a mission lens, or are we just, again, buying technology to make things look cool and whatnot? And common budget drains that we'll see in church technology, some questions to ask before approving those tech expenses, how to plan for growth, sustainability, and risk mitigation. We have probably all implemented something technology-wise that has gone wrong, and so how do we plan for that, and how do we prep for that, as well as how churches in the past have restructured tech priorities to glorify God in whatever way they could. So, like I said, I am curious, who here did work in the corporate world at some point? Okay, yeah, I feel like most of us have, and it's a pretty overwhelming majority. I think probably about 60% of y'all put your hands up there. It's very different. And when we think about traditional ROI versus ministry ROI in the corporate world, there's a couple of different missions that we're trying to accomplish. So from a traditional ROI standpoint, it's how much profit can we make? How much can we mitigate expenses so that we can look better on the bottom line? But in ministry, we're really looking towards how many souls can we save? How are we able to use our gifts in technology, the budget in technology, and the resources that God has given us to steward that in order to save souls? I mean, that's really the core at all of this. That's why we're all here. And we love to hang out with each other and everything, but we're all in community for that grander purpose. So a couple of things that you can ask are, does it connect? Is the technology bringing people closer together and closer to God? Is that a communication software perhaps that you put together? Is that a CHMS solution where you're meeting people, you're learning more about them, you're getting the opportunity to serve them better? There's a couple of services that I've seen too where it will actually track when people walk in, the Wi-Fi connects, and you can see which people have been consistently going to service and which ones may have dropped off, so you're able to minister to them because something might have happened. Does it serve? The technology, does the technology meet genuine needs, or does it create artificial needs? Again, is it something where we as technology people think this is really cool, our staff is going to love this, or is it something where we could probably get by without it and pour those resources into another vat? Another question to ask is, does it multiply? So does the technology empower others to do ministry or to centralize it? And so what I mean by that is, again, we talk a lot about multiplication in our church because what our goal is again, to multiply discipleship groups. We want to find out ways that we can share the gospel with more people. We can do that one-on-one, but if we have technology that we're able to facilitate in order to multiply that and to reach more people, we find that that tends to be quite useful. So moving on here, we can take a look at a little bit, again, I got more lambs and whatnot, this is fun to look at, but we got more tools here that we can use in order to kind of figure out priorities, I guess, of what should we start with. And so we'll see here kind of like a little bit of a matrix. So you got people impact going up and tool complexity going out. There's some things that might make people's lives a whole lot easier, but they might be a little bit complex to use. There's some things that might aid in ministry quite well, but again, might be a little complex to use. But then there's the other things that are very easy to use, very easy to implement, but maybe they don't have necessarily the impact that we would see. So something like a digital clock, being able to watch time, right? That's nice. We got an analog one back there. And so like maybe we put in a digital clock into this room so someone can tell the time a little quicker, like a presenter who's trying to meet a certain time frame for some reason. Or perhaps we've got something like live streams that we're putting out and we're trying to put together all sorts of technology to make those happen. Or a CHMS that we're trying to implement to make sure that we can actually minister to people, understand a little bit more about them. When we're looking at tools like this, if we've got something that's going to be incredibly complex to put out, we might prioritize something that's going to be a little bit easier. And so you can draft out really what would be a matrix to figure out, all right, cool, should we move forward with this, this, or this year, and why? And you actually can bring that justification to leadership, to your XP or whoever it is that you report to, and say, hey, I've done an analysis on some of the things we could do this year. I feel as though we could make these quick wins in this early stage of our budget season, and then we could explore these things beyond there. The other thing that I often see is the shiny object syndrome that we look at when it comes to technology. Again, these really cool things that we love to purchase and we love to have a lot of fun with, but are they really advancing the kingdom, or are they just exciting for us? And so I use our church's mission at the top here, and it is to empower people to obey Christ and his Great Commission. And what that really means is that we are encouraging people to make disciple makers effectively. And a lot of us have probably what is a very similar mission at our church, right? That may be differently worded or might have a couple of different nuances depending on your region and who you're trying to reach. But in that case are some of the things like AI powered, which I'm sure everybody is sick of seeing AI powered on every single tool that we use. But is something AI powered really going to help with that? Cryptocurrency giving, that's something that I've seen with a lot of giving platforms that are starting to bring that in. And you may have some crypto bros in Miami that go to your church or something like that. But is that really going to make a huge difference outside of that region, or is that something that's really going to make a huge advancement or impact on the kingdom? Maybe not. And these are some kind of silly examples, but you're able to take this lens and say, all right, does this item or does this feature advance the mission that we are trying to accomplish? All right. So moving on here a little bit more, we've got kind of some priorities that we can manage and like a little bit of kind of what's a coffee filter, if you will, for some of this stuff. So as far as some questions that we can ask and how to say no to some of the technology, there's a few lenses we can look at this through. So mission alignment. Is the technology directly advancing the church's mission like we were talking about in the former slide? Congregation need. Again, does the congregation actually need this technology, or do we just think they should? And there's some really cool stuff, but I mean, does it really make a huge difference in the overall grand scheme of things? Could we allocate that towards another spot in the ministry? Resource availability is something that I'm sure all of us have run into. Particularly, do our people actually, or like, can we actually afford the total cost of ownership without compromising other priorities? Or even, do we have the people, right? Do we have the people who can actually do this? Implementation feasibility is another one of those where maybe we're trying to see if we have the capacity to successfully implement that project and maintain it. And so if it doesn't pass the filter through some of those, that is a great way to say no, and to say, all right, maybe we can explore something down the road. And it is okay to say no to technology moves. It is totally fine at any point in the process to take a backtrack and think, do we need this? Pray about it and consider it going forward. Another way that we can look at this are into investment categories. So again, as we're using these resources, as we're stewarding these resources, we are effectively investing and sowing into the kingdom. And so a couple of ways that we can look at that are our must-haves, like our core ministry essentials, our growth opportunities, as well as kind of the nice-to-haves. And the core ministry essentials are what are really essential for ministry to happen. We can think of that as things like internet, right? We have to have internet in the building for the most part for people to work. And even then, it may not be a core essential depending on where you are. If you're, working out of a church in Africa and it's a missional organization there, you might be able to do things without internet. It may not be necessary. But of course, if you're downtown in the city and you've got 100 people working in your church office, that's pretty essential. And then if we're looking at kind of the growth opportunities, like technology that would enhance the ministry effectiveness, but isn't quite necessary, those kind of things can help us to determine, do we have something that we could take a step into to further advance our ministries? And then finally, we've got the luxury items. And I often think of that as sort of like the feature bloat that we often see with most software that are out there. We'll see fancy features like, I see it with phones like AI receptionists and stuff like that. Yes, that can be pretty beneficial to a ministry, but does it actually need to be implemented, or could we have someone at a desk answering via the phone and talking with people to minister with them at the first point of contact? So another thing to look for, this is kind of in like the budget dream portion of walking through ministry stewardship, but there's a lot of hidden costs that I'm sure we've run into, and I know that several of us have purchased technology in the past. You buy it, and then you realize there are so many more things to buy, there's so much more implementation to take place, there's hidden taxes and fees, and it goes way beyond what we had originally planned. And so we can only plan for as much as we know. And so because of that, it's nice to be aware of these kind of things. And so it really is sort of an iceberg here. There's so much more below the surface. And so having someone who can walk you through that, or if you've done it before, and you're able to have the experience of purchasing those types of technology and understanding the next steps, that can be really beneficial. So beyond the license costs, we might see below that iceberg that there are taxes and fees that are outrageous. We might see that we need to train people on a solution like this. I mean, we may be, implementing Cisco's or whatnot, and that's going to be quite difficult for the rest of the team to learn, or maybe bringing someone on. It might be maintenance that needs to be done. Maybe it's something that you kind of bought a little cheap, and maybe you should have gone with a more expensive item. I always like to say buy nice or buy twice, and that kind of thing can put you in a situation where you might have to do continued maintenance on that product that you just purchased. As well as integration challenges down the road. If you've purchased something and you expect that integration to work, oftentimes there's some sort of point of failure there, and we can see that there's a lot of fiddling and tinkering to make things work. And so oftentimes we see that these costs are not accounted for in church budgets, and for a full picture of the stewardship of what we've been given, we should really think through all of these items instead of letting them be a surprise to us. The other thing I see are overlapping services, and so overlapping services tend to be quite common in the church world because we see that a lot of services will do kind of the same things. They add those extra features in there. It may be that you have a giving platform that you use already. I've seen some churches that have PayPal, they take Venmo, they've got all sorts of different ways to give, but there are some ways to consolidate that and make that easy. The most common place I see this is in the communications space. So we'll see Microsoft Teams, Zoom, and a phone system, all three of those being purchased by a church. And we'll try to kind of figure out, does that make sense? There could be a use for that. In some cases, Zoom might be a good fit just because the congregation's been using it, but phasing that out might be necessary. Could you move all of that into Microsoft Teams phone? Could you move all of that into an alternate phone solution? Could you move all of that to Zoom? Zoom's got phone solutions. We can put all of that into one bundled location because most of those things are doing right about the same thing. So. Now another spot that I generally see some issues in are unused licenses. And I always like to say that the licenses that you have, the cost of that should be determined by the actual users of that license, the active users. Generally, when we're making a budget, we might put out 100 users for, let's say, we'll just keep with the phone system analogy because I am quite familiar with that space. But let's say you bought 100 phone licenses for your system, but you only have 75 people using it or 50 people using it for that matter. If you have 50 people using those licenses, but you purchased 100 and you're paying for all of it, waiting for this growth, your actual license costs should, in theory, be calculated from a stewardship perspective as nearly double what it actually costs you. So if it was 10 bucks a license and you've got 50 people using 100 licenses, you should consider that $20 per user on your stewardship accountability, if you will. And so if we're looking at that, often I see that in communication software, video conferencing, Microsoft licensing, and Microsoft is its own beast. It's so challenging to get everything to be completely right. But I'm sure that each of us in this room have some Microsoft licenses that maybe we don't need, maybe we're using it properly, or maybe we're mislicensed for it. Those kind of things tend to happen. So moving on here, looking into systems that we can scale, that we're not going to get stuck in a box and can't get out. That is extremely important because we want stuff that can grow with us. And that comes to also understanding where you are as a church. If you are a church that plans to stay local, you're a small church and you've got maybe 100 people as a congregation and your goal is not to spread and plant 5 campuses, you're going to be doing something quite different than a church that's planning for a hyper growth and trying to expand across the country. And so staying in your own lane can be really, really helpful to make sure that you don't get stuck with systems that you don't necessarily need. So as far as those unscalable systems, we can see that some of the reasons for unscalability happen to be either single person dependency, right? You've got that guy who was in the IT position 10 years ago and he's built kind of his MacGyver solutions and now he's the only person who knows how to use any of it, right? Giving proper documentation or having a solution where you can pass the torch very easy can be really beneficial. So as you're purchasing technology, that's one of the things to ask vendors as you're looking into that. Integration challenges we talked about before. The cost increases like per license, right? Are you purchasing cloud solutions to store your terabytes and terabytes of video data at 4K? right? That's gonna get pretty expensive. Or could you explore a tape solution or whatever to offload those videos in a more cost-effective way that would probably work pretty well. Support deterioration, getting some feedback from vendors as to how are your support teams serving your clients, right? Asking people that and figuring out, is this company going downhill? I love to read online forums to kind of get a good idea of where that service is going and how things are working. But most of us here at CITN are meeting plenty of people that we can talk to, and we can get some information from each other as to how different services are working for each other. And so that allows us to have kind of this crowd-sourced idea of how is the customer support with this company. Another thing that I see is, I guess, holding your data hostage. Is the solution that you're using going to hold your data hostage, or is it going to force you to use another solution, which we've seen some stuff happen in this industry where you're forced to use a certain type of solution if you want to use another solution. I see that often with marketing. So some of y'all might be, I guess, web developers or whatnot and work on websites. Is your website owned by you, or are you leasing that site and the data on it? Right, so do you have the ownership over that data if you ever wanted to move somewhere else? Otherwise, it's incredibly expensive to make that migration. And the other spot where I can see that is like feature bloat. I often see when companies start to just pump different features into their solution, that can be a negative sign because it often shows that they're trying to keep you around for one reason or another. They're moving too quickly, they can't support everything, and that can cause issues too. So, jumping in here too, I think a lot of us on the church IT teams can find ourselves in an area where we feel a bit alone. Some of us have some pretty robust IT teams, but others may only have one person working on it who also does several other things. We've got some churches that we work with that are it's an IT guy who's like the Spanish pastor and also the facilities manager, and they're doing all sorts of different things, right? You don't necessarily need a CIO to make those decisions for you or to help you budget. And I really do believe that the Lord is our perfect CIO, right? He's all-knowing. We should be able to invite the all-knowing God into our technology solutions. He will know anything more than all of us in this room. And so being able to do that makes a huge difference. And there's some biblical backing as to some of the methods that we should look at when we're looking into stewarding IT and purchasing new solutions, or evaluating the ones we already have. And so I do believe that a great way to perform this is really as simple as pray, review, act. So pray about it, understand, God, tell me what we should do with the resources that you've given us. Review it, maybe according to Scripture, depending on what the purchase is. Is this something that we really should be purchasing according to Scripture? And then make an act on that. Go and purchase that. The Bible says go so many times, right? We don't want to just ready, aim, and wait. We want to actually fire eventually and go ahead and purchase the solutions that we're looking for. Let's see. All jumbled now. All right, here we go. Sweet. So as we're buying those solutions, there's some resources that we can use. And right, we've got, prayer, we've got the Bible, we test against Scripture. Now we're into sort of the practical piece of this of, do we want to buy the solution or not? And so some great ways to do that are AI, our peers, and experts. AI has become increasingly effective at helping us determine, I guess some of the features and the benefits of implementing different solutions. And I think that people will use AI just to say, should I buy this? But there's a whole lot more that you can do in that. And I would really encourage you to help it, or to ask it to help you build different rubrics, for example, and say, hey, I'm looking to purchase a solution that does insert the following. Could you build me a rubric so that I could interview each of these providers and figure out a little bit more about what I need to know for these purchases? And so oftentimes we'll rely on AI to tell us what to do, but in reality what we should do is we should use AI to spark questions that would be, I guess, relative to our ministries. And so a great example of that could be that you are looking to purchase a cybersecurity solution, and you don't know all those questions to ask because you have a small IT team, and you want to evaluate, does this cybersecurity solution make sense? Take notes as you're interviewing each of those providers, put them down, pass it back into the AI based on what you had, and collect all of that data together to build yourself a score on that rubric. That shouldn't be your only method of purchase, of course, and you should talk to peers, like people in the Church IT Network group, even punching questions out into the Discord and asking people on there. That is a great resource to kind of just get a quick, set of feedback as to how people are receiving those types of solutions. And I think the other place too that you could really rely on people are experts in the field. A lot of these contracts might be a year, 3 years, 5 years. It could be several years before you review another one of these solutions again. And it is humbling when you get back into that space and you try to be an expert in it, but there's so much to catch up on from what has been moving over the last several years. And so I really encourage you to bring an expert alongside you to, I guess, take a look at some of those solutions and maybe present some ideas that would be able to save you time, because there's plenty of other stuff for you to do as an IT manager and administrator. So like I said, there's some questions that we can always ask to really understand a little bit more about whether we should be purchasing something. So up here we've got, how does this serve our mission? Again, talk a little bit back, does it serve the mission, or is it something that's kind of a fun feature that we were trying to put together here? Who's gonna own and manage it, right? Who's actually able to do it? That's sort of that resource capability piece. What's the total cost of ownership, right? Understanding those hidden costs, and also sometimes multiplying that out over the service contract, right? 36, 60 months, a lot of times for some of these solutions, right? Is this gonna be a $90,000 solution, but we were paying 180 before? Did we save half? I mean, what does that look like? Multiply that out over the total cost of ownership. How are we gonna measure success, right? What does that actually look like? We put it in, and so what, right? Make sure that you've actually got a goalpost to meet so that you know that you made a good decision. And what happens if it fails? That's something we're gonna get into in a minute here, but it's not always gonna go perfect. And so it's nice to be able to have some sort of a backup plan. And then could we start smaller? That's another thing we talked through too, is proof of concepts, right? Could we start with a couple of demo licenses, experiment with it, and then implement it fully beyond there? And that's even the case for hardware. Oftentimes hardware companies let you kind of demo a solution at some times, and if it works, great. And then you'll feel really comfortable implementing it. So moving on here, kind of the decision framework that we can look at. Like I said, when you're looking at AI, you're able to put together almost what is like a scoring rubric. And so using that to its fullest is really important. And reviewing that to your mission alignment, understanding, does this actually accomplish the task that we're trying to do? And like I was talking about on the last slide, if you're in doubt, explore a pilot. Test it, see what happens, and if it works, then wonderful. Okay. The other thing too, planning for growth, right? If you are a smaller church, like I was saying, that's planning to stay local, it might not apply to you, but if you're in hyper-growth focused mode and you're planting 3 campuses next year, right? Something like that's gonna look a lot different. And so you want to right-size those solutions to make sure that it is, I guess, where you're going, and not just where you are. And so I've got kind of like the hockey puck analogy that everybody uses, right? And it's kind of a silly analogy, but it really does hold true to ministry and stewardship. We want to plan for what's going to happen next. So we're able to kind of, I guess, make better decisions if it's a more broad picture than a reactive picture that we're trying to look at. What I mean by that is we want to be proactive with our ministry. We want to effectively show people that we have made or show our leadership that we have made the decisions that we've made based on what we plan to do in the future. Another thing we look at is kind of like the sustainability of the projects that we're putting in, right? So vendor sustainability. Is that vendor gonna be around for a while? Or can they handle a big influx of maybe traffic, for example? You often see with churches, we got several thousand people that'll go into a building, right? Whatever vendor we're using, can they handle that? Skill requirements, right? Is this something that we can pass off to other people? Is it something that we can transfer the skills to the rest of our staff? Can we grow with this? And that's looking into kind of that future of that proactive approach, where your goal is effectively to show people, again, this is what we plan to do methodically. Upgrade paths too, again, looking into the future. Can we upgrade the system that we've got, or will we have to buy a completely new system for what we're purchasing? And then exit strategies. It's more than likely that you're not going to use the tools that you're using right now forever. And so what does it look like to get out of that eventually? Some vendors will offer contracts that allow you out for any reason. And it may be that you can get yourself in one of those contracts so that you have a little bit more flexibility. Some don't have that kind of flexibility, and so it may be more expensive to sign a shorter term with that contract. You may pay more, but eventually if you plan to get out in the next year or two, it may be important to spend the extra money so that you've got a little bit of room. And then risk mitigation, again, it doesn't always go perfect when things get implemented, and I'm sure we've all experienced that, and that's never fun. But what are you doing, right? So we got like a little skydiving lamb here having a little fun, but we want a parachute and a backup, right? So what's the backup plan? You know, what kind of redundancy do we have in place just in case? A lot of times I see that with internet. Generally, people put in internet, they'll have a little overlap if they're trying to switch something over, and then they'll cancel the old service afterwards, after everything has been tested. And so that's really important to have some redundancy in place for a little bit. But even with streaming, I mean, we like to have redundant solutions in place to make sure that that's going to happen too. And then finally, training local team members. Things happen, it's ministry, right? And, you know, we care for people. We don't work them into oblivion. And if someone has to go for some reason, you want to make sure that your skills are transferable to someone else so that they can actually take care of the business that's to be done. So I got a couple of examples here of what we've seen in the past and some things that you guys might be able to experience if you start really looking into these things. There was a 1 gig point-to-point circuit that a church was using, and it was costing $4,400 a month. That is absolutely crazy. They had not reviewed that circuit in ages. And so they looked at that circuit and chopped the price down. Again, we got the watermelon chopping. I don't know, you guys, there's no laughing in here. I don't really like my he's chopping the watermelon, right? He's chopping the bills down, and that went down to $1,600 a month and doubled the bandwidth. So it was absolutely immensely helpful for that ministry. That is a lot of ministry money, a lot of kingdom funds to be found for that church. Another one, there was a church that was doing a phone system reevaluation. They were actually mid-review with their contract. They were actually looking at other phone solutions at the time. And the one that they had looked at was pretty expensive, but it looked like the right solution. And this is where I'm talking about, it's never too late to review what you've got. They reviewed that solution and were able to provide, and were able to purchase a better solution that was $2,000 a month cheaper. That is a lot of ministry money. Again, these are the kind of things where if you have some sort of an expert that can come in and take a look at this, or if you talk to your peers, or if you look on AI and you have these scoring rubrics and you're able to get pricing and figure out what things look like, that will yield major ministry money. Another solution, right? Cybersecurity solution, completely distributed, all sorts of different solutions everywhere, and just a whole jumbled mess. Taking a look at other solutions, this church was able to find a solution that combined all of those into one vendor through kind of like a module-based approach. And with that, they now have a much simpler cybersecurity solution, one point of contact, and having all of that cybersecurity managed in one place means that all those points of failure can be managed in one place. And so that was a huge benefit to them. This one was really interesting to me, and I've actually been looking at this, and I learned a couple of things through here, and I'd love to talk through that in a minute here, but a copier contract. There are some copier contracts coming up for renewal with a church down in kind of like the Midwest area, and they are looking at what do they do next. And there were some really severe predatory contract renewal practices that we ended up seeing going on. And there was a resource that we brought in to kind of take a look at that. And we discovered that there was never a returned countersigned document And I did not know this, but a copier resource, again, this is just the benefit of crowdsourcing information. A copier resource that had been in that industry for a while was able to uncover that if that countersigned document was not returned, that may mean that they have several weeks, I mean days, weeks, or months, they don't really know, left on the contract based on how the terminology would be done in the contract. So without having that countersigned document, they actually didn't really truly know when their contract ended. So they could be subject to several days, weeks, months more of payment than they were expecting, which is really interesting and fascinating. And so the way that the contract was written, there are all sorts of strange nuances to that that I had no idea about. And so it was really cool to have an expert go look at that. And so being able to look at that, and also in this situation too, it was discovered that the copier contract had encouraged an upgrade of the devices, but the devices were likely going to be good for at least, according to the copier expert, at least another 7 years beyond this time. So they were trying to prematurely renew these, but they would be good for so much longer based on the utilization that they had. So that kind of thing was really interesting to me to look at. And then finally, a great example of just chopping cost and really like a like-for-like service. There's a church looking at security cameras, looking at different options. They had a vendor come out. They had some questions about the price. I think we're all kind of questioning price on security cameras when we order those. They tend to be really expensive. But they took a look at it, and they looked at another vendor, switched them instead, saved 50%, literally half on that solution, just because, again, it was never too late to renew, or not to renew, but to review those contracts and make sure that there wasn't a better solution. So a couple of kind of real world examples of taking those in different parts of IT ministry, putting them together and reviewing what might actually be able to be saved for y'all, or potentially some availability to consolidate for y'all. So some key takeaways. I think really the biggest piece here is that technology is supposed to be driven by faithful stewardship of God's resources. And so not really the desire to move to different tools. We're really called to be wise managers based on kind of those definitions of stewardship that we had from earlier, and not eager consumers. It's not like me getting ready to buy my AirPods, right? And so I see oftentimes that there are several traps that people walk into, and that tends to be fast decisions. Again, we have an all-knowing God. Bring him into the IT decisions. We can get really stuck into just doing the job because what we do is often a back office function. And so it really is important for us to take advantage of the knowledge that God has for us. And then in addition to that, I think it's also important to kind of understand the shiny object syndrome. Don't get distracted, stay on the mission. Don't try to keep up with the Joneses, right? A church that's expanding is going to be a lot different than the needs of a church that's not, and vice versa. I mean, that expanding church that's looking for 5 new campuses, they're not going to want to buy the same products as a church that's much smaller. And then also, vendor-driven decisions. Don't let the salespeople, like that copier contract, don't let them determine the direction of your IT. Like, don't let that happen at all. Make sure that it is a well prayed about, reviewed, and acted upon decision that you have been leading and managing through that process. Let's see here. So after this, what are you going to do, right? You're going to get back. You've seen a presentation. You've got all this information, but what do you actually do? And so the first step is really just to rest. I think all of us are going to be pretty tired when we get back. We've got a lot of work to catch up on, and we want to make sure that our ministries are still running back home. And so take a rest those first few days and whatnot. The next week, take an inventory of everything that you've got in IT, if you can. You might as well take a look at it. If there's something that you've kind of brushed under the rug for a while, and maybe you haven't even taken a look at, or maybe there's that project that you wanted to get to, but you haven't quite gotten to it yet, uncover that and take an inventory of all of those IT resources. A couple weeks later, I would totally connect with some of the people here. Again, we're all going to be busy next week, so probably like a week or two later is a good time to get in touch with everybody. But talk to them. get some ideas from friends and people that you have met at this conference. Jump into AI, build a rubric for that next project that you've got. Start interviewing clients, or not clients, vendors based on that rubric, and figure out a little bit more about what you're trying to do. Maybe engage with a consulting resource. You know, I'd be happy to do that, but engage with a consulting resource that would be able to help you out with that. Someone who's got an expertise if you haven't reviewed those contracts in several years. And then, beyond that, it's time to start really putting that into action. And so you can review what could be cut out, maybe adjusted, reallocated, or even review some current purchases. And again, it's okay to stop mid-contract. You can always tell someone no if you have not signed the paperwork. And so make sure that you always take that into account, because sometimes it feels like we can kind of get pushed into these contracts, but we don't have to be. Until we have signed it, it is not official. And then beyond that, make an actual plan for a budget and present it to leadership. Again, tell your XP, I have reviewed this based on a matrix of the things that I have looked at and some of the projects that I think would be important to do. And then finally, begin enacting those changes. So that's all we got. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, but I'd love to hear if there's anything here. We're about 45 minutes or so, and so we got a little bit of time for Q&A. And if not, we've got some extra time. So appreciate y'all. Any questions? Yes, sir.
What is the name of your company does?
Yes. So we shop IT services, save a bunch of money for churches, and don't charge a dime. So we've got relationships with several vendors. Our goal is really just to navigate that process. Phones, internet, cybersecurity, backup, disaster recovery, security cameras, access control, and managed services, utilities, computers. So,
We have a card.
I do. I'd be happy to get you one. So. Anybody else? I don't want to hold you all here. Not like class dismissed, and then y'all can do whatever. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate it, and hopefully you got some good value out of it. If you got other questions, private questions, or anything like that, I'll be around at the booth for a little bit longer, and we'll be happy to answer. Thanks.